So if you spend any time in Genesis chapter 1, which is part of what you just saw in that video there is a really interesting progression. It's the creation narrative. God created on the first day, second day, third day, all these days that take place. God gets to work. Okay, He's creating. But then around the third day, there's another phrase that's inserted at the end of the day. God saw all that was done and said, "This is good." So right about the third day, "this is good," gets added to that. So the fourth day, fifth day. Then you get to the sixth day and something very specific changes. You get to the sixth day of creation and God said, "This is very good." He adds a descriptor to good. It's very good. So the question then becomes, what happened on that sixth day that changed everything, that made something very good? And it's that verse, Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, where it says, God created mankind in His own image. In the image of God He created them, male and female, He created them. So the fancy theological words for that are the imago Dei, the image of God, the fullness of what it actually means to be human. So the imago Dei means you bear the mark of the Creator. You as a human being sitting here in this room right now, you bear the mark of God upon you, His image. In fact, if you take the image of God away from you, if you take the fact that you are created in the image of God away, somehow that makes you actually less human. Makes you less human. So follow me here. The imago Dei, the image of God, sets you apart from the rest of creation. You and I are not animals. Okay? We're not animals. Humans, us, we carry this inherent worth because we have been created in His image. The worth is already determined. Your value is already determined. It's because you've been created in the image of God, which means anytime that we view or treat a person with less dignity or less worth or less value, we're actually devaluing the image of God. We're devaluing and deworthing the image of God in each and every one of us. Now, what happens when we do that is we make them less than human for our own sake. They become just a body. That's what they become. And when you can bypass the image of God in somebody, when you can treat somebody with a little less personhood, when you can treat somebody a little less human, it is absolutely abhorrent what people can do to other human beings when they can somehow not look through the lens of seeing them as created in the image of God. Now, if you've been tracking in this series, you might be wondering, why are we talking about Genesis chapter 1? We've been in this other section. There's Genesis way over here. This is way at the beginning. We're over in Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. Way over in the New Testament. Way over in the Gospels. So why are we talking about Genesis when we're supposed to be talking about the Sermon on the Mount? Jesus' big reclamation message, where He's taking all of these truths that kind of get distorted, things that even the church has taken and added things to or taken things from, and things that God really didn't design that way, and He's reclaiming these things, and then He's setting those things right. Then He's inviting us to be a part of that kingdom that He's establishing, okay? He's building us upside-down kingdom, where the first are going to be last, where the least are going to be lifted high, where there's no oppression, there's no abuse, there's no injustice. None of those things exist. He invites you and I, His followers, if we profess a faith in Jesus Christ, to join Him in that, this kind of new creation that's taking place. So if you're tracking, you know that we're not in the book of Genesis. We're in the book of Matthew. And we're at this little section, and again, if you even are tracking even more specifically the last few weeks, gone through the Beatitudes, gone through God's purpose for us, we've gone through the law and the prophets. Last week we talked about do not murder, and now we're conveniently brought to the doorstep of one of the most comfortable subjects that you could ever talk about. And every pastor gets super excited about talking about. So welcome to the day that we talk about adultery and lust. Yes. Are you ready? Thank you. Nice. From the mouth of babes. Nope, I don't want to talk about it. So we're going to come back to it in a little bit, all right? So put your finger there. We're going to talk about it in a little bit. Instead, what I want to do, I want to talk to you about chattel slavery. Chattel slavery. So back in the summer of 2021, Shelley and I had our 25th wedding anniversary, and we treated ourselves. We went down to New Orleans. We spent some time in the French Quarter, which was absolutely amazing. I highly suggest it. It was really, really cool. But because we're who we are, we wanted to be educated about different things and all kinds of different stuff. And a couple days after we'd been there, we got on a tour to go to a place called the Whitney Plantation. You'll see some pictures here on the screen. So the Whitney Plantation, this is not the kind of a plantation that you go to get your wedding pics done, or, I mean, they're beautiful. I mean, they're very extravagant and stuff like that. But the Whitney Plantation has actually been preserved to be a way to educate people about what life was like in the 1800s in that area of our country through the perspective of slavery, through the perspective of enslaved Africans. And so we went, and on a 100-degree day in July, we put headphones on, and we started our walking tour around this giant plantation all over the place, hearing the stories and the narratives of these different enslaved people. And it was horrible. I mean, it's everything that you can imagine it probably would be, and worse. The thing that we were not prepared for, though, we were hearing these stories, as we're walking along, and we'd go around a corner and there'd be another thing you would hear about. It was something that we saw. Now, I have grown in my wisdom, I think, over the years, so I used some discretion. I did not put a picture of this on the screen, because it's pretty shocking. In 1811, there was an uprising that took place. Some enslaved Africans decided we don't want to be slaves anymore, and so there was this uprising. It grew to about 500 individuals, most of whom were enslaved Africans who said, we're not doing this anymore. This is 1811, we're not doing this anymore, and we're revolting. And so there's this coast along the Mississippi down there called the German coast. It's about 50, 60 miles long, and it's got all these plantations that are owned along that coast by former Germans. And so here was this German coast, and this rebellion started, and this uprising started, and these slaves were gaining momentum and all kinds of different things like that. Well, ultimately, the militia was dispatched. They were captured. The whole thing got put under, and it was taken care of. So about 63 individuals actually were charged with this crime, essentially the insurrection against their owners. And so Shelley and I, as we're walking through this plantation, we see the result of the capture of these individuals, and it was recreated in a display on the plantation grounds. So what happened was we had these headphones on, and we turned the corner around this hedge of bushes, and we see basically this large area where 63 human heads were cast in ceramic and painted black, and they were put on sticks in the ground to represent what happened to these 63 individuals that were captured. The 63 body parts were then strewn across the Mississippi for 60 miles back then as a deterrent against any other future uprisings. It was a sobering moment, and honestly, it's a sobering reminder of what humanity can do when you strip the imago Dei from somebody. When you fail to see somebody as created in the image of God. So God created mankind in his own image and said it was very good. The word chattel, I don't know if you're familiar with that word, chattel, slavery, but the word chattel back then generally was used to describe livestock. Livestock or any property that really didn't have an identity. You could be traded, it could be moved around. That's what chattel was. So that's why referring to somebody or something as chattel today is kind of seen as a derogatory term. You're essentially labeling property. It's void of identity. Okay, chattel slavery existed upon the dependence of seeing another human being as less than human. You couldn't do it. There would have been no slavery if you had to see somebody else created in the image of God. So chattel slavery existed because humans made a decision that there were other humans that were somehow less than. Are you following me? That's how it was established. So to do so enabled fully human people to treat other people as a means to an end. So you would treat a slave having no more value or purpose than an animal. No identity, no heritage, no ancestry, no personhood. They're less than human. Less than human. Now, you and I know this. Treating somebody as less than human doesn't make them less than human. Treating somebody as though they do not have the image of God planted on them does not mean they do not have the image of God planted and stamped upon them. So what does this have to do with Matthew chapter 5? What does this have to do with lust and adultery? So I picked a very extreme example of what this looks like to take a person and then strip them of what makes them human, the image of God, and treat them as just a body. Slavery, in its extreme, stands alone. There's really no comparison. At the same time, though, dehumanizing, disembodying people, seeing them and treating them as objects of possession or pleasure, that happens all the time. Happens every single day. And it happens because we fail to see other people as created in the image of God. That's the root issue right there. Now, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is trying to get people to understand that it's one thing to keep the letter of the law. So like last week, we talked about murder. He said, thou shalt not commit murder. Check it off the list. Never done it. Okay? Woo! Jesus is saying, okay, now let's live the spirit of that law. Like you shouldn't hate people. Like you shouldn't build up resentment and bitterness in your heart towards people. You're killing community. You're killing relationship, which is just about the same. Okay, so he's trying again to reclaim this issue of the letter of the law and breathe into it the spirit and help us to live out the spirit of the law. I'm glad you never killed anybody, okay? But at the end of the day, how are you feeling towards other people? How are you treating other people? So he's not passing out star stickers because you didn't do it, right? So from the very beginning, God declared the dignity and the worth of every single human being by creating us in his image. It's already there. Your dignity and your worth is absolutely 100% intact. It is there because God created you in his image. Okay. So then he tosses in this lust thing. Right? So I want to read this passage from Matthew chapter 5 for you. He says this, you've heard that it was said you should not commit adultery. But I tell you that anybody who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Then he goes on, he says, get a little graphic here. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out, throw it away. Okay, Jesus, hang on. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than your whole body to be thrown into hell. If your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off, throw it away. Okay, it's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. Then he says, it's been said, anybody who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anybody who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality makes her the victim of adultery, and anybody who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Okay, so what is Jesus' point in this whole thing? And it's just like last week. His point is this. The object of our adultery and lust is an image bearer. The object of our adultery and lust is an image bearer. Now, I know that there's a ton to unpack in this passage, okay? But I want you to hang with me because just like last week, Jesus is coming after the spirit of this law. He's coming after the spirit of this. And lust in particular is a really problematic word. When I say the word lust, I'm going to assume that there's a certain connotation that comes with that, and usually it's sexual. Okay? That's how and even Jesus uses it somewhat in that aspect here. So we tend to equate it with sex. Okay? Biblically, the word means wanting to take property for yourself and treat it as property so that it can be used at your discretion. That's what lust is. It's seeing something, wanting to treat that as property that you can acquire for yourself. That's what lust is, okay? To use something for yourself. So here's the problem. It's hard to treat someone as property if you still see them in the image of God. It's hard to use someone when you're fully seeing them as fully human, which means you're acknowledging the image of God stamped on their life. Okay? So that's why I mentioned chattel slavery. It's not inherently sexual, even though it was part of dehumanizing captured Africans. Slavery served the lust of taking something, treating it as property for personal use. Okay? Adultery is just one of the various issues that Jesus could have brought up, but he brought this one up for a reason. And we're going to get to that here in just a second, but I need to give you a fair warning, obviously. Today is a little different. In a normal sermon regarding this particular section of Scripture, I would talk about the damage that it does, the lust and adultery does. We'll talk a little bit about it, but I'd share how last week, you don't get a star sticker for not committing adultery, okay? You don't get a reward for not doing something you're not supposed to do. That's not how this works. And like last week, I'd point out how the religious people in the crowd who were listening to what Jesus would say, they lived the letter of the law, but they were really blowing it when it came to the spirit of it. They were blowing the heart issue out of the water. So that's why he brings up divorce. It says this. He says, anybody who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce, but I tell you that anybody who divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, makes her the victim of adultery, and anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. So that's a little add-on to the end of this. Like, what are you supposed to do with this information? We don't have time to unpack it all, so let me just help you just a little bit. He's referencing Deuteronomy chapter 24, actually, way over in the Old Testament, where if a divorce happens, the woman is not taken advantage of, and she's protected. Okay? And the problem is that by the time Jesus rolls around, the religious leaders had twisted this stuff that they'd learned in Deuteronomy 24 to mean that you could divorce your wife for any reason. If she doesn't cook what you want, see ya. If she's barren and can't provide children for you, see ya. She's failing at being a spouse. So you could write a certificate of divorce you could write a certificate of divorce just because you got bored, because you got attracted to somebody else and you're like, you're aging out, and I want the younger model. There's all kinds of reasons that they could come up with to do this. Now, were they committing adultery? No. But they were dehumanizing people. They were seeing people as property and seeing people as less than, as disposable. Okay? The larger problem in that culture, though, is it's a shame-based culture, which means if you're a woman who got that certificate of divorce, it meant you had no livelihood anymore. You were fortunate if you had some family members, maybe even an older child that could take you into their home. But by not being married in that situation, your ability to provide for yourself was stripped from you. And so if maybe you could find another guy who would marry you, and you can imagine, nothing more exciting than marrying somebody because you need a place to live, right? You can imagine what that relationship was probably like. Or sometimes they found themselves begging. They found themselves in a completely different socio-economic class. Sometimes basically giving themselves less reputable work. The religious leaders in Jesus' day lived the letter of the law. They didn't commit adultery, but they failed at the spirit of it. Lust, or treating something or someone as less than. They failed at the spirit of it. So again, if this If this was a normal passage, a normal message today, I'd be tempted to get really practical with you and provide tools, guidelines to avoid lust in your life. I'd give you statistics on porn use. And then I'd give you statistics on why giving you statistics about it doesn't change anything. Doesn't. We could talk about not being alone with somebody who's not your spouse. We could talk about not working out at the gym if you can't keep your eyes to yourself, instead work out at home. We could go down the purity culture route and talk about dressing modestly and all kinds of different things like that. We could talk about finding an accountability group. Confessing to somebody. I mean, Jesus here alludes to gouging your eyes out if you have a problem. Okay, Jesus, take it easy. Okay? But the idea that he's getting at is there probably should be a willingness to do whatever's necessary to deal with this issue in your life. And none of these things are wrong, okay? None of those things are wrong. But there's a problem at the heart of the issue, and I have a hard time addressing the symptoms without addressing the disease. The disease is the issue, right? The disease is the fact that we have the ability to somehow see people as less than human. We have the ability, humanity has the ability on some level to see people as less than stamped with the image of God, which leads to the ability to pursue all of these different things. Whether it's a sexual sin, slavery, abuse, whatever, the object of our adultery or lust is an image bearer. It's viewing or treating another human being as though they are only a body, as less than human, as though they do not bear the image of God. So lust, as Jesus is using it, it ties this unnatural value to appearance, to physical traits. It dehumanizes through the vice of comparison. I don't know if you've ever thought about this. Lust communicates low value to those not lusted after. It's very problematic. Who don't fit those standards of beauty or desire. Those are victims as well. And here's the deal. I was really unsettled as I was praying through this message, and probably a couple of weeks ago I realized, okay, Doring, it was almost like God was just kind of messing with me a little bit and saying, you can't approach this the way that feels comfortable for you. There's a big part of me that knows that the way to approach this passage in particular is to address the saturated culture that we live in, and we do. I know this issue of lust, this issue of adultery, and more is represented in this group right here in this room today. I know that. It's a fact. My natural inclination is I'm a fixer, and so I want to give you some steps. I want to give you some tools. I want to give you some resources. I want to talk you through it and to help get on the other side of this or whatever it is. That's my natural inclination as a fixer, is to want to do those things. And if you need to do that, we can chat later. My problem is the last 2 weeks, I got hung up on a couple of words. I don't know if that's ever happened to you, where you feel like, okay, yeah, I got this, I get this, but then there's just that nagging, like, there's something that just kept coming up over and over in this passage. It's just a couple of words, but these couple of words, like, hijacked everything about what I wanted to do today. And it's when Jesus says this, it's in verse 32, he says this in regards to viewing somebody as less than human. He says it makes her the victim. It makes her the victim. Don't get hung up on the gender thing. Makes him the victim, makes people the victim. When you do this, when you view somebody as less than human, when you view them as though they've not been stamped in the image of God, it makes them a victim. And I got hung up on that. Because most messages on this topic and on this passage are directed towards those who commit the offense. And that's the only way I've ever preached this passage. Hey, lusters, stop lusting. Hey, adulterers, stop adultering. That's usually how this approach is. I want to close today, though, doing something a little bit different. I want to speak to those of you who are on the receiving end of that dehumanization. To those maybe who question your value today and your worth. You've experienced, or maybe even you're experiencing today, what it's like to be viewed as less than by somebody else, to be a victim. So, to the teenager that's in this room right now, who feels like you have no other choice other than to compete for the attention of allowing somebody to see you and treat you with less dignity than you're worth. Your dignity's set. You've been created in the image of God. You don't need to compete. It's set. It is set. Or the teenager who looks in the mirror and you question your value in a world that elevates celebrity and the number of followers. And maybe you're different. Maybe you don't fit the mold. You question as you look in that mirror as a teenager, I don't think that I even matter. I don't know if I matter. Again, your value has been predetermined. Like, there's no question. Your worth is there, your dignity is there, your value is already set. I can go on. So to the spouse sitting in this room or watching online right now, and you are questioning why you are not enough. Why am I not enough? Questioning what you are or are not doing that has caused them to look or long for someone other than you. To that spouse. To my brothers and sisters of color, inhabiting bodies equally created in the image of God, yet forced to navigate this world differently than I do. Bodies that are tied directly to the disembodiment of the practice of race supremacy, or to the sexually abused, disembodied by somebody who was only interested in their own pleasure and not in you as a person. And you have to carry the weight and the knowledge of what's been done to you, or maybe even is still being done. To the physically, to the mentally, emotionally abused, treated less than human, always forced to answer the question for yourself, why? Why me? What have I done wrong? What did I do to deserve this? What's wrong with me? Am I even loved? To the shamed, to the minimized, to the ridiculed, walking the halls of a school, sitting by yourself at work, whatever it is, maybe even today you're sitting in this room, wondering if other people, when they look at you, they rank your value based upon some scale that you've either set for yourself or somebody at some point in your life has set for you. And you're wondering and you're questioning your value to the people that you see in this room today, around you. To the mental health sufferer who sees themselves as less than human, believing that they have little value. Waking up in the morning and wondering, would anybody even care if I'm not here? Wondering if you matter. Here's what I want to say to every single person that would question their value and their worth today. Demand dignity. Demand your dignity. If somebody, or you're tempted to allow somebody to steal your dignity, or to minimize your worth, or to view you as less than somebody who's been stamped with the image of God, demand your dignity. Demand your worth. I'm serious, demand it. Stand up and demand it. When somebody seeks to dehumanize you, to validate their treatment of you, demand dignity. That is not the opposite of loving your enemies, by the way, and we'll get to that here in a couple weeks. Woo! Okay. You, and there's just so many times as a pastor I want to just, I just want to plant something in you so that you're just like, yes. This is the one thing today I wish I could just stick right in you and you'd be like, you have been created in the image of God, and your worth and your dignity and your value has been set long before you were even born. Okay? Long before. You were even born. And I'm so sorry for the pain. I'm so sorry for the things like adultery or lust or some kind of bondage or some kind of whatever has dehumanized you and disembodied you and treated you as a body, as property, as something to be seen or used for somebody else's gratification or pleasure. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But I do know the God that can heal your heart and heal your wounds. You might bear those scars, but God can reach in and do some amazing things in your life. So I want to pray for you today. If you're struggling with, looking at stuff, if you're struggling with lust and all kinds of different things, we can have a conversation about that later. But I couldn't shake the fact that God just really wanted me to make sure that I acknowledge today the fact that there are victims in this story. There are victims in this story that sometimes sit through messages like this and get on the other side of the messages and think, well, what about me? You just talked about this group, but what about me? And I want you to know you're heard, you're seen, you're loved, you're cared about, you're valued. You're valued by the God who, in Genesis 1, said, this is very good. This is very, very good. Okay? So claim your dignity. Claim your dignity. I'm going to ask you to stand if you would. And hey, folks, listen, Pastor Ben said it. I'm going to repeat it. I'm so proud of you guys. We went out and served yesterday morning in my group, but, you're kind of doing your own thing. And next thing you know, all day long, I just kept saying it, come through, come through, come through. So many of you guys have been mobilized and are touching people's lives and doing amazing, amazing things. Thank you. There's a ton of you that are doing it without seeing it on social media as well. And so thank you. Thank you for representing the church, but more than anything, thank you for representing just Jesus, because that's why we're doing what we're doing. It's about Jesus. Father, you're good. And Father, you looked at us even as we were being crafted together in our mother's womb, and you said, this is very, 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 very good. So good, Father, that you equated who you are with us. So I pray today, Father, that you would help us to view one another, to view the people in our world, the people we disagree with, the people we're challenged by, anybody at all, Father. Help us to see them through your eyes as stamped and created in the image of God. At the same time, too, I do lift up the victims of this. The older I get, the more I realize there's more and more than I ever dreamed or imagined. It just reveals the depths, Father, that we go to if we're not grounded in you. And so I pray, Father, for healing for those that have been abused, who've been betrayed, who've been treated as nothing more than property or a body. I pray that you would somehow restore them even beyond where they were before. That you would bring healing into their lives, that you would bring healing into their minds, into their hearts. Help them to be an advocate today for themselves and an advocate today for those that do suffer still, that have to suffer in silence. Father, I pray that you would draw near to them and help us as a church, Father, be an advocate for them as well. We love you. We praise you. And again, it is an absolute privilege to be your church. So thank you, God. It's in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. God bless you. Hey, if you got a kid in here, there's all kinds of projects going on in this building. So make sure you stop by those and make sure you visit the North Shore Clinic outside as well. God bless you. Thanks.